So here at the Allerton Project, we have been pursuing a more regenerative approach to our farming operations for at least 20 years. And what we found in that time, especially based on some of our most up-to-date research on some long-term regenerative agriculture projects, is that we are seeing a reduction in some of our synthetic inputs onto the farm. In particular, in the move from conventional tillage to reduced tillage within an arable system, we're seeing huge savings in fuel, diesel especially. We're seeing significant savings around our use of nitrogen in terms of utilising more legumes which are fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere, and also reducing our use of synthetic nitrogen year on year by having them in the rotation and then having that nitrogen left in the soil for the following crop in the following year. And we're also seeing fantastic results from no longer having to utilise insecticides on our farm due to our use of green infrastructure, things such as beetle banks, in order to encourage crop pest predators into our more regenerative system. So we are seeing some fantastic results in those areas from moving to a more regenerative system. But it is also important to note that, in a reduced tillage system, for example, you are likely to be more reliant on, for example, herbicides in order to destroy crops coming into the cropping cycle. So there are some fantastic benefits to be had, but it is also important to note that there are also trade-offs between that more sustainable farming system and when we're purely looking at the use of synthetic inputs. So on our farm here at the Allerton Project, we've had a massive focus on biodiversity and on increasing the biodiversity of our farmed area for the 30 years that we've been operating, and we've seen some huge benefits from that. So, biodiversity is essential within a more regeneratively farmed system. So, for example, encouraging more pollinator resources onto the farm will encourage those pollinators into our farm system, and that will enable us to hopefully have increased crop yields, as well as being beneficial to the wider farmed environment. Of course, we're also always looking to encourage crop pest predators into our system. So by utilising things such as hedgerows, grassy margins, pollen and nectar strips, and of course things like beetle banks, we're encouraging those invertebrates, those beneficial invertebrates, into our farm system, and then being able to use them to go out into the fields and deal with our aphid pests and other crop pests. And that's fantastic, because that means that we can reduce our use of sort of more generally harmful insecticides, and therefore reduce our impact on the environment, whilst still producing beneficial and really high quality sustainable food. So I'm standing here in one of our fields of permanent pasture at the Allerton Project, and for us, being a mixed farm is a really important part of our sustainability as a farm business. And of course, that mixed farming is at the heart of true regenerative farming. Now, it's only really in the last decade that we've started to integrate more heavily our livestock into our arable rotation. We've taken them out of our permanent pasture and we've started to put them back into the fields where we grow our crops on a rotation, to really start to bring back in those restorative phases alongside the more exploitative phases of the standard arable horticultural rotation. And of course, it's in bringing those livestock back into that wider arable rotation where we really see the benefits of regenerative agriculture. And that's because we're using those livestock, we're using things like grass and clover lays and legumes in order to break up our cropping cycles, in order to introduce those restorative cycles within the rotation, which are helping to break disease cycles, they're helping to break weed cycles, whilst at the same time that those legumes in the ground for multiple years are helping to restore the fertility and the health and structure of our soils, whilst hopefully, of course, also increasing organic matter. And livestock have a key role in that. So by grazing livestock on those grass lays, we're helping to really turbocharge the system, whereby we're hoping to breathe more life, more fertility back into our soils, to not only sustain them where they currently are, but also to regenerate them and to improve the quality of our soils for the long term. So obviously one of the huge challenges that farming faces at the moment is when it comes to climate change. Farmers really are on the front line of that challenge. So by moving to a more regenerative, lower impact, more conservation agriculture system, we can help to mitigate against some of the worst impacts of climate change. So for example, introducing diverse herbal lays and legumes into potentially really light sandy soil type arable fields, where those fields are no longer capable of supporting a high input, high output arable or horticultural system. By bringing those grass lays in, you're helping to build resilience into that land. With the deep rooting structures of those crops, you are able to actually provide a crop which should grow through even the harshest of droughts by accessing water deep down in the soil profile. And from that, of course, you can also then have the income from the livestock that you will graze on those fields. Or when it comes to things like within the arable rotation, again, in a dry time, reduced cultivations and direct drilling especially, they can really help to maintain and retain the moisture within the soil in a way that inversion tillage just doesn't. And we've seen the results of that here at the Allerton Project, that by moving to these more sustainable, more regenerative farming techniques, it is helping us to deal with the extremes of weather that we are seeing. Of course, it's also important to recognise the limitations of those systems. Although with a reduced tillage system, for example, your work rate is massively increased versus a conventional tillage system. It's also important to note that on heavy clay soils like we have here at the Allerton Project, potentially the window that you can go in there direct drilling, for example in a wet time, can also be narrow. So it does take careful planning, and you do have to be timely with your applications. But certainly for the long term, that more sustainable regenerative approach is the way that we're going here at the Allerton Project in order to help mitigate against the worst impacts of climate change.